It's Friday night in October of 1993. And in Northern California, 3 junior high school girls are having a slumber party. Halloween is around the corner, and the girls have been trying on different costumes in preparation for the upcoming holiday. Within seconds, their lives will change forever. October 1st, Polly Klass and Jillian Pelham were waiting for another friend outside of Polly's house in Petaluma, California. It was around 8:30 when Kate McLean and her mother showed up. The 3 girls were ready for fun. It was Friday night. There was ice cream in the fridge, and they were going to stay up all night long. This was going to be a party. No one had any idea of the danger that lurked so close by. The girls kept to Polly's bedroom, but they couldn't suppress the noise as easily. At about 9:45, Polly's mother, Eve Nickel, looked in on the girls and asked them to keep it down. She was suffering a migraine headache and thought she'd turn in early. Eve's bedroom was right across the hall from the girls, and although she had chided them about the noise, she was pretty sure it would only take a few minutes for the 12-year-olds to get noisy again. Before going to bed, Eve took her prescription pills to block out all distractions and get her fast to sleep.
Hold on, guys.
The party continued on for almost an hour before the nightmare began.
That was cute. Yeah. I'm gonna get the sleeping bags, okay? Okay.
It was around 10:30 when the intruder entered the room.
Hi.
At first, Kate and Jillian thought it was a joke. Then they saw the knife. He told them if they screamed, he'd slit their throats.
Whose house is this?
Immediately, he tied them up and started asking questions. He wanted to know which girl lived there and who else was in the house. Polly spoke up.
Keeping money around this place.
The girls were terrified and
Is
crying,
there anybody else home?
and he assured them that he wasn't going to hurt anyone, that he was only there for money.
Don't believe you. Yeah. Somebody else is supposed to be here.
But when Polly told him where some cash was hidden in a jewelry box, he made no attempt to find it. He gagged the girls and took the cases off some pillows to use as hoods. He made Polly get up and told the others to count to 1,000. By the time they were done, he said she'd be back. Then he took Polly Klass and disappeared into the night. Petaluma police officers were called to the scene after the girls managed to free themselves and wake Polly's mother. They responded in minutes. Investigators entered Polly's room and began to look around. The bedroom was in disarray and told of the events that had happened just minutes before. On the floor were binding materials, cut strips of cloth. The cords from the Nintendo game had been cut, and a strap that was clipped from a purse lay on the floor. Pillowcases were strewn about.
I know.
What Petaluma Police Detective Mike Meese saw wasn't encouraging.
I remember standing at the doorway to Polly's room and looking at these few bags of evidence that we had been able to collect and thinking that that was just such a pitiful amount. And I looked down at the rug and I talked to my partner, Larry Pelton, and said, "Let's take the rug." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "I don't know why, but let's just take the rug. We just don't have enough evidence."
FBI.
Police were in desperate need of assistance. Fortunately, help was on the way. After being contacted by the Class family, the Federal Bureau of Investigation offered its expertise.
How about, have y'all talked to the mother?
Yes.
Shortly after midnight, the FBI appeared at the house of Polly Klaas. Typically, the Bureau handles kidnappings, and with $800 a year to investigate, they have plenty of experience. Because he was familiar with the community and experienced in kidnapping cases, Special Agent Ed Fryer became the lead investigator. But he knew something about this case was different.
It had all the earmarks of a stranger abduction case because the statements from the two girls were consistent. Stranger abduction cases are the hardest cases to solve, in my experience, because, again, there's no connection between the perpetrator of the crime and your victim, or the victim's family, or somebody even associated to the victim. It's a random act.
Surprisingly, a vast majority of kidnappings involved disgruntled family members. And though Polly's parents were separated, her father, Mark Klaas, was immediately cleared of any responsibility. Abductions involving total strangers are exceedingly rare and leave little for investigators to go on. In this case, however, there were witnesses.
Was his hair long or short?
A police sketch artist was called in from the San Rafael Police Department. For 2 hours, Jillian and Kate tried to recall the face of the man who had barged into the bedroom. The girls were still terribly upset, but they managed to give the artist a pretty good description. Authorities now had their first idea of what the stranger looked like.
His nose and mouth.
After 4 a.m., the girls were taken to the police station,
Like this.
and the FBI called in one of its special forces, the Evidence Response Team. Tony Maxwell leads the crew.
In looking at cases across the United States, we have found that when somebody is kidnapped, especially a young child, that they will generally be harmed within the first 24 hours, and probably within the first couple of days could even be killed. So time is of the essence. In that kind of work, the investigator needs to move quickly.
The Evidence Response Team is designed to provide forensic resources at a major crime scene. Their sole responsibility is to collect evidence. And they use the most sophisticated collecting equipment available to do it. An electrostatic dust print machine collects tiny hairs and fibers off the floor when a positive charge is passed over a sheet of mylar. Any loose debris clings to the mylar and is sent to a lab for careful inspection. Although the police department had already dusted for fingerprints, they had come up with nothing particularly promising. But they didn't have access to the same equipment as the FBI. The alternate light source was a new method that employed a unique fluorescent powder, which when combined with a distinct ultraviolet light and amber-colored goggles, could illuminate many things that otherwise would remain hidden. The team found 4 dozen fingerprints the police were unable to see using conventional equipment. But even those were of no use. They were attributed to family and friends. After hours of meticulous searching, something finally turned up.
Hey, we're still working on it. Do you have anything? Yeah, I have some ridge detail in the bedpost here. It looks like it's pretty good ridge detail.
A palm print that at the outset seemed like the first real piece of forensic evidence left behind at the scene.
That palm print was found on the bed, on a crossbar of a bed, where he apparently put his hand up for just a second to lean on it, perhaps to support himself as he was grabbing something. And with the alternate light source and the fluorescent fingerprint work that we did, we were able to see it, collect it, and then gather that for the laboratory.
At that time, the FBI's fingerprint database, AFIS, didn't contain palm prints, only fingerprints. But even a palm print won't catch a suspect. It will only identify one once he's captured. FBI Special Agent Mark Mershon explains.
People often think that when you have a fingerprint or a palm print that you quickly establish the identity of a criminal. The truth of the matter is, in most instances, you have to identify a suspect, have fingerprints for that suspect in order to compare with a latent fingerprint.
The hunt for the suspect prompted authorities to cover Polly's neighborhood inch by inch. By dawn, more than 100 agents and officers had begun a 24-hour search for Polly and her abductor. Helicopters and bloodhounds had been called out, and an all-points bulletin was issued by local authorities and the FBI. Systematically, the authorities searched every house in the neighborhood. Agents went to Polly's school to talk with teachers and students in the hopes that somebody might have some useful information. Investigators canvassed the neighborhood in pairs, asking if anyone had seen anything suspicious that night. One by one, they interviewed all of Polly's neighbors. Several people recalled seeing a stranger around the neighborhood that fit the description given by the girls. Thomas Georges and his friends were on their way to the video store at around 9 o'clock that night when he noticed a stranger standing in the shadows in front of Polly's house. Thomas knew everyone in his neighborhood, but he had never seen this man before. Returning home a few minutes later, the boys saw that the stranger was still there. The description Thomas gave to the authorities matched the suspect they were looking for. Sean Bush was playing video games with some friends who lived in a small rental cottage directly behind Polly's house. It was about 10:30 when Sean happened to glance out the window. He was surprised to see a strange man on the back porch of Polly's house. He appeared to be going for the back door. His description of the man also fit that of the suspect. There were others who saw the suspicious man that night, but unfortunately none of them alerted the authorities. As Petaluma Police Chief Patrick Parks explains, time was working against them.
In stranger abduction cases of small children, there is no more critical factor than time. Time is absolutely of the essence. And for that reason, you have to get out as many resources as you can. You have to put out the word as far as wide as you can. You have to involve as many agencies as you can, get them focused, get their efforts channeled, and hopefully bring about a successful resolution.
While officers continued to comb the neighborhood, FBI investigators began executing the standard operating procedure in cases like these. After eliminating family and friends as suspects, they focused on ex-cons who were registered as sexual offenders throughout Sonoma County. Gradually, they branched out to surrounding counties, carefully questioning and investigating each registrant. But nothing turned up.
This is a hard case to believe that it even happened. There's 3 girls, they're in a slumber party. They're playing games in their bedroom, in their home, in a typical community, in a typical city. And somebody can walk into your home, the sanctity of the home, the security of your home, and take your daughter is if it wasn't impossible, was inconceivable.
The following day, the search for Polly Klaas had escalated into the largest manhunt in the nation. A massive community volunteer network was formed to assist authorities. While hundreds of citizens searched, others passed out flyers, trying to cover the entire city as quickly as possible. Back at the FBI's Trace Evidence Lab in Washington, D.C., forensic expert Chris Allen was carefully surveying the items collected from Polly's house.
I noticed that in untying the pieces of bindings, the thin nylon strips of bindings that were used to tie up Polly's girlfriends, that they had jagged edges to them. And I was able to line them up perfectly so that I was able to determine that these all came from one piece of cloth originally, and it was a piece of cloth like a lady's nightgown or a slip material.
Other pieces of evidence found in Polly's room were not so easy to classify. Tiny fibers collected with the electrostatic dust print machine proved to be a challenge to identify. After painstaking examination and comparison, Allen concluded that they had come from the interior carpet of an automobile. Eliminating the cars that could be accounted for at Polly's house, Allen suspected that these carpet fibers were most likely from the kidnapper's car. One more item Allen found was a little more personal to the suspect.
I found in the vacuuming of the area rug that was in Polly's bedroom that she was playing on with her girlfriends, a dark brown, forcibly removed head hair. And I say forcibly removed because it had a 3 or 4 millimeter root sheath on it, actually skin material that comes out of the scalp when the hair is forcibly pulled or yanked out.
If Polly had pulled a hair out of the suspect's head, it was evident that she didn't go without a struggle. But even a hair with DNA evidence couldn't bring investigators any closer to finding a suspect. The palm print lifted from the bedpost was sent to Michael J. Smith, a fingerprint specialist with the FBI. Examining the print under laser light, Smith determined that the print had enough ridge detail to photograph. But the light emitted from the laser turned the print orange, and Smith needed to capture a black print on a white background. He instructed the photographer to reverse the color so that the finished print would appear the way it would on a fingerprint card. Now the print was indelible and could be filed until a suspect was apprehended. Investigators had unearthed some solid evidence, but it wasn't enough. Time was running out, and Polly Klaas was still out there, somewhere. "48 hours after the abduction of Polly Klaas, her father, Mark, got a call.
Polly?
It sounded like Polly.
Okay, honey.
She told her father that she was in a hotel
Where
room
are you?
somewhere, and that her abductor had stepped out for a moment.
Tell me where you are. Polly!
Then the
Polly!
line went dead. It offered the first glimmer of hope. But unfortunately, since Mark's line wasn't set up for a trace,
Detective Fryer,
all
please.
authorities could do was wait for another call. Word of the abduction spread rapidly. In 2 days, 50,000 flyers had been distributed. Community volunteers quickly organized a search command center to work in tandem with the police and FBI. It was an unprecedented grassroots effort. A telephone bank was manned 24 hours a day to field calls and tips. A copy of every lead that was phoned in was shared with the FBI and Petaluma police. Before long, the search center had screened 60,000 calls. Out of those, authorities were compelled to follow up on over 12,000 leads. Processing that amount of data would have been virtually impossible without help from an FBI computer processor.
The FBI just happened to have the Rapid Start team. It was a relatively new concept with the FBI, where on an investigation with a high volume of information, we would computerize that information, essentially triage the value of the investigative leads and make the assignments and track the progress.
Even with so many leads, there was one in particular that investigators were anxious to follow up on. When Mark Klass received the first call, the FBI was powerless to do anything about it. The second time she called, they were ready.
Hello.
Like the previous call, it sounded like Polly,
how are you, honey?
and she could only talk for a short time before she had to hang up.
Where are you?
But it was long enough for authorities to make a trace.
Polly. Got it.
The FBI had traced the call to a house 30 miles away. There hadn't been enough time to collect an army of agents. The job would have to be handled by a few. But something wasn't right. This was just a normal family home. There was no sign of Polly or her abductor.
What's going on?
A terrible realization dawned on the agents. When they sat down with one of the girls in the house, she confessed to making the calls.
I'm sorry.
She admitted that friends from school had dared her to call and impersonate Polly.
I didn't know.
The entire incident had been a cruel joke.
This was the only indication we had after a week's time that Polly just might be alive still, and we all were poised and hopeful that this would yield a solution and her safe recovery. Of course it didn't.
In mid-October, Kate and Jillian were brought in to give another description of the man who tied them up. A highly acclaimed forensic artist was flown in to make a second sketch.
It was pretty well cut. Yeah.
The artist was known for relaxing witnesses enough to coax an accurate description from them. The girls were less stressed than they had been that night, and were able to give her more to work with.
No, they were
The second sketch was much more precise. This sketch looked like a person. New flyers were distributed immediately. There was no time to waste.
But if you look back at true stranger abductions, we have this rule of thirds. The children who are abducted, typically 1/3 are recovered alive, 1/3 are recovered dead, and 1/3 are simply never heard from ever again. That's what we faced in this particular investigation, and that, I think, was one of our motivations to keep the sustained effort up.
After a reward had been offered for Polly's return, authorities received a call demanding a $10,000 ransom. They traced the call to a Petaluma apartment building. This time a SWAT team showed up in force. They were not going to take any chances.
FBI! FBI! Come on! Down! 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 Sit down! 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 Cover! Cover!
Once again, authorities and the family had been fooled.
Put your hands behind your back. Don't move. Do not move. Going on. Don't move.
20-year-old James Hurd was arrested for attempted extortion and posing as a kidnapper. It was a crushing blow for everyone.
It became very frustrating. It was certainly distracting towards the main thrust of the investigation, but you had to deal with it. There was no way around it. You could not ignore those things. And it certainly chewed up a lot of time and resource.
The family had been especially discouraged. A letter Polly's parents wrote to the kidnapper was published in the October 17th San Francisco Examiner. Whoever you are, wherever you are, please return Polly to her family. She belongs here. We miss Polly so much. We miss the twinkle in her eye and her sweet humor. We long to see her beautiful smile and hear her musical voice. They also addressed Polly. Our darling, if you can read this, please know that your mommy and daddy love you so much, and we will continue to search for you until we can hold you safely in our loving arms again.
I don't think I ever lost hope. So I had numerous contacts with Mark Class, with Eve, with members of the family, and that was a question posed to me many times. And my response was no. We have not lost hope. We will not lose hope.
Across the country, people wanted to see Polly brought home. Banners sprang up, and Americans began a candlelight vigil. Thousands donned ribbons of lavender, Polly's favorite color, to show their support of the search.
We conducted searches during the day, during the night. We had a 24-hour operation going. We conducted searches sunny days, on foggy days, rainy nights. Whenever the information came in, we reacted to that because in a case like this, physical evidence is crucial.
The search never stopped. The Navy and search and rescue experts joined the thousands of volunteers who were constantly looking. Police and volunteer task forces worked tirelessly. But it would be nearly 2 months before anything broke. November 28, 1993. It was 2 months after Polly Klaas was kidnapped that authorities got their first real lead.
Thanks for coming, okay? I've got some items I want to show you out in the clearing.
In Sonoma County, a sheriff's deputy was called out to the house of Dana Jaffe. It sat at the end of a long, winding drive off Pythian Road. Dana had been out inspecting her property when she noticed something unusual and thought it might be of use to investigators. She led the deputy through a densely wooded area to a clearing just a few yards from the long, winding drive to her house. Scattered in the woods were a few items that seemed somewhat suspicious. There was a large piece of silk cloth that had been fashioned into what appeared to be a hood. A couple of strips of packing tape were on the ground.
Yeah, it was about 2 months ago. We couldn't do anything about it. They ran his place.
A pair of young girl's tights had been tied into a knot, and human hair was entangled in the knot. Other debris surrounded the area. Then Dana recalled the night she'd caught a trespasser on her property not far from where they stood. It was nearly 2 months before. It all started when Dana's babysitter, Shannon Lynch, had left Dana's house and was making her way back down the long driveway. A man was walking down the middle of the private drive. His stranded Pinto was off to the side.
Get out of the car and help me.
He said that he was stuck and insisted that she get out of her car and help. He also wanted to know what was up the drive. But Shannon immediately sensed something wasn't right. She'd later describe him as looking like a wild man. She drove on, leaving him there, determined to get to a phone. Shannon found a payphone about 2 miles down the road and hurried to call her friend. She was anxious to get a hold of Dana and warn her of the scary man trespassing on her land. Dana didn't waste any time. She grabbed her daughter and a baseball bat and took off down the hill. She saw the car, like Shannon had said, but the strange man was nowhere in sight. She continued down into town and called the police. A few minutes after midnight, 2 Sonoma County Sheriff's deputies showed up. Dana explained that she didn't really want the intruder arrested for trespassing. She just wanted him off her property.
Yeah, just fine.
The deputies found the trespasser, a little agitated. There was alcohol on his breath, and he was sweating profusely. There were bits of leaves and brush in his hair, as if he'd been rolling around on the ground. He told them that he'd been out sightseeing when he realized that he was on private property. When he tried to turn around, he got his car stuck on the side of the drive. He blurted out that he'd been under the car trying to free it, but the deputies didn't believe it. The way his car was trapped, there wasn't enough room for a person to get underneath.
You gotta move on, you gotta go. 10, 2, 1003, 1000.
The deputies administered some roadside sobriety tests, but he passed them all. Looking in his car, they found some cans of beer in a plastic bag and a small duffel bag in the back seat. When they asked him if he'd been drinking, he actually opened a beer and began to drink it.
Pour the beer out, all right? We can't let you be drinking any of that.
They immediately made him pour it out and then told him they wanted to pat him down. He became extremely upset.
Leave me alone, just keep that stuff away from me, all right?
To make him comply, the deputies told him they would be within their rights to run him in on trespassing. After he'd heard this, he calmed down considerably. They searched him carefully and continued questioning him, but could find nothing incriminating. He was just odd. The deputies remained suspicious, but when they ran his license, it checked out. His driving record was clean, and he had passed the sobriety tests. They had held him for about 45 minutes already, and they had no legal means to detain him any further. There was nothing left to do but pull his car out and send him on his way. That had been 2 months ago, the same night that Polly Klaas had been abducted. A hood, bindings, a young girl's pair of tights. It was too much of a coincidence. Putting it all together, the deputy quickly put a call in to the Petaluma Police Department.
Dispatch. I'm up here on.
Within an hour, Detective Mike Meese and Agent Ed Fryer arrived to check it out.
I'll never forget the scene. It was late at night then. By this time, Mike Meese and I are standing up on the hillside there on Pythian on the road. It was beginning to get a little misty and foggy, and the rain started to come down. And we looked at each other, and we knew in our hearts that we had basically uncovered a very critical crime scene, that this was going to lead us to the resolution of this case.
After the evidence was collected, investigators immediately began searching the Pythian Road site for any signs of Polly.
We spent days searching the mountain with over 300 volunteers. I believe we had 25 to 30 search dogs, and we conducted extensive ground searches for Polly, believing that she was still alive. which was the premise that we were working on.
As the search commenced, everything began to snowball. Authorities checked with the Sonoma County Police to get the full report of the incident that happened on Dana Jaffe's property. The man deputies had questioned was Richard Allen Davis. Accessing his criminal record revealed he had recently been paroled from an 8-year sentence for kidnapping.
What we learned about Davis initially was 1976 he had been arrested for robbery and kidnapping and assault with intent to commit rape. We learned in 1978 he had been arrested for another kidnapping, as well as a couple of counts of assault with a deadly weapon. 1984 he'd been arrested for a kidnapping case, assault with a deadly weapon, including the use of a firearm, and armed robbery. You start reading these reports and realize, you know, hey, this guy's a bad actor. This is an individual certainly more than capable of being involved in a crime like this.
The arrest photo on file matched the girl's description. His mother lived in Petaluma, giving him reason to have been there. The pieces were falling into place. The items discovered near Pythian Road were immediately flown to forensic specialist Chris Allen in Washington. Of the most interest was a strip of cloth that was found in the woods. Allen was quickly able to confirm what detectives had suspected.
Essentially what we're trying to do is establish whether or not the cut edges would line up or match. The middle strips represent the fabric that was found at Polly's bedroom, which were used to bind Polly's girlfriends. Subsequently, on the second submission, we received the cloth that was found at the Pythian Road site. These all fit together like a puzzle with the edges and the pieces of fabric matching up end to end.
The strips meant more than likely Polly Klaas had been out at Dana Jaffe's after her abduction. Without a doubt, Richard Allen Davis had been there too. Though it wasn't enough to arrest Davis for kidnapping, detectives felt if they could just get him in custody, they could quickly gather the evidence they needed to tie him to Polly's disappearance.
Everything else fell away, and we focused on what we had with Mr. Davis, what happened out there at Pythian Road, and what we were going to do next.
When investigators discovered Davis had an outstanding warrant for breaking parole and DUI, they decided to bring him in. But he wasn't at home when they arrived. Then a deputy sheriff who was securing a perimeter around the area stopped a van. At the wheel was Richard Allen Davis. When the deputy realized who he had, he calmly called it in to the investigators back at the house.
Is there a problem, officer?
No, sir. Just sit tight, okay?
Authorities reported to the scene, and Detective Meese approached the van and asked Davis to step out.
Step out of the van?
He informed him that he was under arrest for violation of his parole.
No. I'm Detective Meese. I'm arresting you for
One thing I think it's important to understand how Richard Allen Davis was taken into custody, because it was such a low-key event, and because Mike Meese went ahead and handcuffed him. He did it in a very professional way, and he started a rapport going with Richard Allen Davis that later was very useful in bringing resolution to the case.
It had been 2 months since Kate and Jillian had seen the man who took Polly Klaas, but they had no trouble picking him out of a lineup.
Number one, step forward, please.
Even without the beard, his was a face they could never forget.
Number one, step back, please.
Though he'd been arrested for parole violation, Davis was questioned about the kidnapping. He vehemently denied any involvement, but authorities let Davis know that if he wanted to talk, the door was open.
So I took Davis into the hallway and I told him, I said, hey, look, what you need to know is we've got all the physical evidence it takes to make this case. And all you're looking at is a kidnapping right now. So if you want to talk about it, you got to let me know. And he made a non-committal response, didn't want to talk. And I remember patting my pockets looking for a business card, didn't have a business card with me. And I said, you know, I'm going to leave my name and number with those guys, meaning the correctional deputies. And if you ever want to talk about it, you know, give me a call.
Back at the FBI latent fingerprint lab, Mike Smith was comparing the palm print found in Polly's bedroom with one that had been taken from Davis since his arrest. This was a crucial piece of evidence. Matching the two prints would undoubtedly link Davis to the abduction. After careful examination, the results were called in to Agent Fryer.
I just got a call from FBI laboratory. They matched Davis's palm print to a palm print taken off of Polly's bedroom, or her bedpost. It was again one of those moments where there's butterflies in my stomach. Again, realized that this was really very powerful evidence. So I hung up the phone, and again there was a lot of noise and commotion in the command post. I stood up and I asked everybody, "Can I have your attention, please? Can I have quiet for a moment?" I said, we just got confirmation from our laboratory that we've matched this palm print taken from the bedroom to Davis. We can place him in the bedroom. And it was just a huge cheer from everybody. Papers were flying. It was just great news to everybody.
This is it. It's concrete. He was in her bedroom. We can prove it. We had him nailed down.
Though news of the matching print had gone public, Davis was being held in isolation and had not heard anything about it. Then one day, a friend of his showed up for a visit. He urged Davis to talk to authorities and tell them where Polly was. But Davis continued to deny responsibility. Then his friend gave him the news the rest of the nation had already heard. It came as a complete surprise. Davis realized it was going to be impossible to explain how his palm print got in Polly's bedroom. There was only one thing he could do.
In Davis's mind, he's now got to do something, and that is try to make whatever deal he can make with the authorities, because we know that he was in Polly's bedroom. We can put him there.
While on his way to the massive search for Polly near Pythian Road, Detective Meese was paged to call the jail. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, and Meese was anxious about what he might find out.
After this wait, you know, Davis comes on the phone, and I recognize the voice. So I know it's him, and I said, he says to me, he says, "Hey, I screwed up. I screwed up big time."
Detective Meese and Special Agent Larry Taylor met with Davis in the interrogation room, where Davis related the details of the night of October 1st. Though he was living in something like a halfway house, he had applied for an overnight pass to go visit his mother in Petaluma. Unable to find her house, he had a few beers and walked the streets of Polly's neighborhood. At one point, he was stopped by a man who wanted to sell him some marijuana. He decided to go ahead and buy the joint. In Davis's own words, he got really buzzed and went to the store for more beer. He soon found himself wandering the neighborhood aimlessly. He wasn't sure where he was or what he was doing. But Davis had come to the neighborhood prepared. He'd brought a bag packed with bindings and tape. Forensic experts were able to determine that he had cut the strips with a pair of scissors, a fact which implies intent. Then Davis said he randomly picked a house on the street and crawled into an open window. He remembered hearing TV voices and said he may have picked up a knife from the kitchen. He said he didn't remember anything after that. He claimed the next thing he knew, he was driving in his car and was surprised to find a young girl sitting next to him. She was complaining that her hands were tingling. According to Davis, he adjusted the straps for her and drove around wondering what he had done and what he should do next. Then he drove off the side of the road and got the car stuck. Once he realized he was stuck for good, he says he got Polly out of the car and carried her up a steep embankment about 30 yards away.
Get out of the car!
He planned to leave her in the darkness until he could figure out a way to free the car. The rest of Davis's story about what happened at Pythian Road matched the witnesses' accounts. At the time of the incident, the bulletin about Polly's abduction was just going out over police radios. But the deputies were tuned to a different frequency and would not have heard it even if they had been in their cars. They ran his license, but the equipment they had at that time was only able to give a cursory printout of Davis' driving record. It couldn't generate his criminal record. They found nothing they could hold him on.
What I want you to do is, all right, I'm gonna follow my finger.
Davis recalled how the deputies pulled his car out and escorted him to the main highway. But he claims that he waited for 15 or 30 minutes and returned to the site to find Polly. Then he just drove around. At some point, he realized he had to get rid of her. At long last, authorities had found out what they'd been desperate to know. Polly Klaas was dead, and Richard Allen Davis was the man responsible. Davis agreed to take them to the site in a deserted area of Cloverdale where he had left the body. It was night, but inspectors felt the need to confirm Davis's story couldn't wait until daybreak. He led them to a field near an abandoned lumber mill. Out in the field, under some boards, investigators found the body of Polly Klaas.
It was an odd feeling. You're in the presence of somebody like Davis, and just a few yards away is what's left of a very beautiful, innocent 12-year-old.
The Polly Klaas case was special because people cared. Because the whole community stepped forward and said, this is the last child you're going to take, and that this is our child, and that we are going to go out and look for her until we find her.
The case wouldn't come to trial until 1996. But after 10 weeks in the courtroom, a jury found Davis guilty on 10 counts, including kidnapping, robbery, burglary, murder, and attempting to commit a lewd act on a child. The latter charge Davis continued to deny during the entire trial. Investigators strongly believed that despite Davis's testimony, Polly was already dead at the time deputies helped him with his car. He was sentenced to death and continues to sit on death row at San Quentin Prison. Polly Klaas left behind a legacy to save other lives. The way missing persons cases are handled has changed forever since the investigation. Law enforcement databases are linked to different agencies providing vital information to multiple jurisdictions. Missing persons bulletins are now sent out over all police channels. At routine pullovers and traffic stops, officers can access not only driving histories, but criminal records as well. Implementation of the 3 strikes you're out legislation was a direct result of the case, as was the push to expedite the appeals process in murder cases. And a foundation established in Polly's name aids the search for missing children.
It looked just a little fuzzy on the website.
Involvement of the FBI was critical to bringing resolution to this case. Had they not come in and gotten involved early on, it's doubtful we would ever have had resolution, or certainly that it would have been as quickly as it was, even though it seemed like a long time.
The unique partnership that was formed between local police and the FBI set a precedent that continues to this day.
In a multiple slaying at a sorority house, a single bite mark is the only evidence. Can detectives use it to build a case against the most notorious serial killer of all time? Investigators hunt for a sexual sadist in a Canadian resort town. He leaves behind a trail of victims, but few clues. Can they stop him before he strikes again? Someone's murdering men on Florida's highways. A bloody palm print suggests a woman's touch. But who is she? What prompts some intelligent people to become cunning killing machines? As forensics tries to break their chain of death, psychologists seek to understand serial killers' fatal compulsion. On a February night in Pensacola, Florida in 1978, police officer David Lee saw an orange Volkswagen leaving the parking lot of a closed restaurant. Because the car had no reason to be there, he ran a check on the tags. He discovered it was stolen. The driver tried to flee the scene. After a chase and a struggle, he was apprehended. Police found stolen credit cards and several fake IDs in the car. The driver was taken in for questioning. The man flashed a student ID, but police determined that it too was stolen. After 2 days in custody, he finally decided to tell police his real name, Theodore Robert Bundy. At first, the Pensacola police had no reaction. They had no idea who Ted Bundy was. But they'd soon find out that his name had just been added to the FBI's 10 most wanted list. He was suspected of killing 36 young women in at least 4 western states. His lackluster arrest in Florida was the beginning of the end for the most notorious serial killer in history, who may have murdered over 40 women in 16 years. Ultimately, forensics would tie him to his crimes. In the process, the study of his murders would help spawn a whole new field of forensic psychology, a science that tries to understand how serial killers are created and what we can do to stop them. William Hagmeyer of the FBI's Behavioral Sciences Unit in Quantico, Virginia, interviewed Bundy in prison.
He was probably the most efficient killing machine that we've seen amongst the serial murderers that we've studied. With his ability to articulate how he made certain choices, why he let certain people live and die, he's become a standard by which other serial killers are measured.
So enormous were Bundy's crimes that they defied traditional crime-solving tactics. It wasn't until after he was caught that the pieces began to come together. Bundy didn't know that Florida would be the last stop on his trail of death. He arrived on January 7th, 1978, after escaping from a Colorado prison where he was awaiting trial for murder. He rolled into Tallahassee and moved into a boarding house called the Oaks, near Florida State University. It's now a fraternity house. Bundy didn't kill randomly. He was methodical, selecting college-age women with dark, straight hair parted in the middle. His proximity to campus provided ample quarry. Within a week of his arrival, he resumed his deadly rampage. At the Chi Omega house, sorority sister Nita Neary returned from a date around 3 a.m. on January 15, 1978. The lock to the back door had been broken for weeks. As she entered the house, she heard a commotion upstairs, someone running. She stopped as she saw a man run down the steps and disappear into the night. Then she realized someone was hurt. At 3:15 a.m., the campus police answered a frantic and garbled call for help from the sorority house. Bill Taylor was one of the first officers to respond.
We had stopped and broke up a fight between two of our fraternities, and we were just clearing that call when we got a call that two girls were in a fight at the Chi Omega house at 661 West Jefferson Street.
The campus police thought this was just another routine call. But nothing could prepare them for what they found. The house mother told the officers two women had been attacked. After calling paramedics, police investigated the rest of the house. An officer found Margaret Bowman in her bed. She'd been bludgeoned, then choked to death with a stocking. Down the hall lay another woman. Like Margaret Bowman, Lisa Levy had been sexually assaulted, then beaten. In his fury, the killer had left bite marks in her flesh. She died en route to the hospital. While paramedics tended to the injured, police tried to make sense of the scene. Officer Taylor had never witnessed anything so brutal.
You're thinking all kinds of different things when you're going through there, and just how in the world could somebody do what was done to those victims in that manner while they slept in their beds.
The women never saw their attacker. But Nita Neary, who escaped a similar fate by mere seconds, described him. He was of medium height, wearing a navy pea coat and a knit cap. He carried a club. The sketchy description provided little help. The killer left behind no evidence, not even a fingerprint. At Florida State University, almost every man became a suspect. Every woman lived in terror.
We knew we were looking for a white male. We knew we were looking for someone who was around 5'8", 5'10". We knew that he had a dark colored kind of peacoat kind of jacket on with a one of those navy blue watch caps on. You were looking at everybody that was walking, or everybody that you could see. Did he match that? Where could he be now? You know, is he hurting somebody else now? You get that horrible feeling that there's more, that something else is going to happen. Are there other crime scenes? Are there other people that are injured, other people hurt that we don't know about yet?
By then, Bundy had already moved 100 miles west to Lake City, Florida. There, he changed his tack and pursued a different kind of prey.
Yeah, he's just in the back there, yeah.
He lured 12-year-old Kimberly Leach into his van.
Yeah, he's right in the back.
They drove off. Leach would be Bundy's last victim. After ditching the stolen van and killing the girl, he stole a Volkswagen. He was partial to them because the passenger seat could be removed to accommodate his victims. But before he could strike again, he was picked up by Pensacola police for driving a stolen vehicle. Bundy's past was catching up with him, courtesy of the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. Florida police were almost certain he was responsible for the Chi Omega murders, but they had to gather evidence to prove it.
Or 7 if this is a bicuspid to
The
right.
only clues
But,
collected at the Chi Omega
certainly
murders
thing you have
were the
in
bite marks
there,
on the
this
body
one
of
shows
Lisa
it
Levy.
well, because the lateral
Investigators
to the right is
hoped they
definitely
would be
behind the
enough.
sepals, and it's high in the arch.
The task of
bite
analyzing
was also
them
made
fell on
from,
forensic odontologist
the first
Richard
bite anyway
Souveron.
was made harder.
When Bundy was arrested, and the bite mark evidence was not considered a high priority. But when the detectives in the case were unable to come up with anything else, such as blood, fingerprints, hair, fiber, anything like that, then they decided, well, we'll give this a try.
At the time, bite mark evidence had not been used in Florida courts, but investigators had no alternative. Fortunately, one of the bites left a deep impression. Dr. Souveron saw that the killer's teeth had distinctive characteristics. They were crooked, chipped in several places, and had an unusual configuration. But he needed an impression of Bundy's teeth to make a match. That required a search warrant based on probable cause that Bundy's teeth were similar to the killer's. A snapshot of Bundy showing his teeth convinced a judge to sign the warrant. Souveron could now take the impression of Bundy's teeth. From the impression, Souveron made casts. It was apparent that Bundy's teeth were very unusual.
Bundy's teeth are unique. I've never seen a set of teeth like Bundy's, and indeed, no one in the world has a set of teeth like Bundy's.
Turned and bit a second time, and here's the lateral incisor.
Most striking were Bundy's lower teeth, which showed an unusual pattern of wear, along with a distinct layout. The top teeth were chipped.
Both sides, and the teeth fit.
Using acetate overlays of Bundy's bite pattern, Souveron was able to conclude that only Ted Bundy's teeth could have left the bite marks found on the body of Lisa Levy.
Drop in.
Especially with that eccentric bite of his, that's pretty compelling.
Based in large part on this forensic evidence, a Florida grand jury indicted Bundy on July 27, 1978, for the 2 Chi Omega murders. His indictment was read on live television.
Let's go.
Theodore Robert Bundy, you are charged, indictment, 2 counts burglary and 2 counts murder in the first degree, 3 counts attempted murder in the first degree.
My chance to talk to the press.
Contrary to section 78204 Florida statute.
I'll plead not guilty right now.
And your grand jury.
Bundy, always wanting to be in control, enjoyed the attention and turned his trial into a media circus.
Well, listen, I've been kept in isolation for 6 months. I've been kept away from the press. I've been buried by you. You've been talking for 6 months. I think it's my turn now. All right?
We got a court order that there won't be any press here.
Sure there won't be any press interviews. You've given them out. I'm gagged, you're not.
Okay. The Captain Roger will read you your
I'll
right.
be heard.
Emphatically denying his guilt, acting as his own attorney, Bundy was convicted of the Chi Omega murders, as well as the murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach.
Ted Bundy was caught in large part because he was a terrible driver, and an alert police officer in Pensacola picked him up. He was convicted in large part because of forensic odontology. He rarely left any forensic evidence at his crime scenes because he knew what the police were looking for. He didn't know that the science of forensic odontology advanced to the point where a forensic odontologist can testify with tremendous accuracy that bite marks on a victim, as with Ted Bundy, matched Ted Bundy's teeth. He didn't know that.
As Bundy sat on Florida's death row, he began to trade information in order to postpone his execution date. He confessed to a string of murders throughout the West and provided details about how he committed them. He painted a graphic picture of the evolution and slow deterioration of a serial killer.
To become a serial killer is to become a serial tennis player, a serial jogger. When you get away from it for a while, you start getting the itch to get back. He said the itch was getting tremendous. The clock was ticking.
Experts suspect Bundy may have started killing in 1962 at age 15. Then, beginning in 1974, he killed 8 college women in and around Seattle. On crutches, or with his arm in a sling, he used his seductive charm to lure his victims. In this way, he snared 6 women in 6 months.
Ted Bundy felt that this victim had a choice. She didn't have to come with me. And as he said on many occasions, I wasn't a caveman killer. I didn't go and drag them out. You know, they came to me.
Emboldened by his success, he sought more risky prey during a crowded weekend at Lake Sammamish State Park near Seattle. 2 of the women at the lake that day, 23-year-old Janice Ott and 18-year-old Denise Nosland, apparently left with the injured stranger 4 hours apart. It was the last time anyone saw them alive. Based on eyewitness descriptions, police artists made a composite sketch of the slender young man with a Canadian accent who called himself Ted. Part of Bundy's success was his cunning. Part was his looks and outward behavior. No one could have suspected his homicidal inclinations. Seattle writer Ann Rule has made a career studying killers and their victims. In 1975, when she was just starting out, she was hired to write a book about the Seattle killer. Little did she realize that he would turn out to be someone she knew.
And I thought, gee, that looks like Ted Bundy. And I know that Ted sometimes affects a Canadian dialect. I knew that he lived in a boarding house on the same street where 2 victims had been found. But they were looking for people with a criminal record. And Ted Bundy, the only thing they had him for, 2 citations for bravery, for helping citizens. He'd been assistant director of the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Council, worked for the governor of Washington. Not the kind of guy you're going to focus on.
Ann had met Bundy in 1971, 4 years earlier, when she volunteered at a crisis clinic in Seattle.
I was a civilian volunteer, and they would always pair us with a work-study student. And just through the luck of the draw, my partner was this very nice young man who was then about 23, named Theodore Bundy. So I spent 2 nights a week for a year, locked up alone all night long with Ted Bundy.
The weekend following the abductions, the beaches at Lake Sammamish were strangely empty. Over the next several months, bodies of women who disappeared began turning up in the nearby hills. Police in Washington intensified their search for the killer. 12 women had gone missing in the Seattle area, all suspected to be victims of the mysterious Ted. But Bundy was smart enough to know when to move on. In September 1974, he made his way to Salt Lake City. Over the next month and a half, 3 teenage girls disappeared without a trace. Then, on November 8th, Bundy spotted 23-year-old Carol Duranch. Posing as a police detective, he approached her and told her that someone had been caught stealing something from her car. He asked her to look inside to see if anything was missing. She told him everything seemed to be there, but Bundy asked her to accompany him to police headquarters to see if she could ID the thief anyway. Though Duranch was skeptical, she did as he asked. But as soon as she got into his Volkswagen, the trap was sprung. He handcuffed her and threatened to kill her on the spot. But she managed to get the car door open. She broke free. Duranch was the only woman that we know for sure to escape the clutches of Ted Bundy. But Bundy was unfazed. Over the next several months, more women would die. In Utah, Bundy was finally caught on a traffic infraction. Carol Duranch picked him out of a lineup. He was convicted of kidnapping and sentenced to 1 to 15 years. He was then extradited to Colorado, where, based on hair samples found in his car, he was charged with the murder of a young woman. And there, through a small hole in the ceiling of his prison cell, he escaped to kill again. 8 days before the Chi Omega murders, Ted Bundy fled Colorado and headed to Florida. A friend loaned him money to live on. He'd been incarcerated over a year, and his fatal compulsion grew all the while.
This need to fill the addiction had grown so strong because he'd been in prison and unable to kill, but sitting there fueling his fantasies, thinking about it. And when he was out, he had no control over it.
Bundy was now taking chances, making mistakes. Gone was the kindly stranger ploy. At the Chi Omega house, he attacked with violence and rage, and left behind the clue that led to his conviction. Bill Hagmeyer believes that Bundy's recklessness was inevitable. Serial killers become more daring and less predictable over time.
Many serial killers, in fact, all that I've dealt with, their crimes start out as personal agendas, so to speak. The first victim may be an accident, it may be a displaced aggression, but after that, it becomes predatory.
Once he was in prison, Bundy provided the ultimate case study in serial killings. Hagmeyer set to work trying to understand where a killer's fatal compulsion stems from. Bundy himself helped interview other serial killers on death row to find a common denominator. The answer isn't clear-cut. In background and behavior, serial killers are just like the rest of us.
Serial killers come from different backgrounds. There is no consistent factor that I'm aware of in all their development. Basically, if one were to look at Ted Bundy's evolution as a human being, they would be shocked that he became a serial killer because he didn't act any differently, didn't appear to be maturing any differently than other children around him.
Writer Ann Rule believes that killers like Bundy are born and bred.
I think to create a serial killer or any sadistic sociopath, you have to have a combination of a genetic predisposition toward violence. Just like some people can play the violin, some people can tap dance, but these people have a tendency toward violence. Now, if that child is born into a loving home where he feels safe or she feels safe, we'll never know. But if you have the terrible synchronicity of the genetic predisposition and an abusive home, then you have the perfect soil to grow one of these people.
Bundy showed his homicidal tendencies as a young child of 3. His Aunt Julia, who was then a teenager, awoke to find Ted slipping butcher knives into her bed.
But as with most serial killers, it came down to a matter of choices. We're all a product of our environment, our genetics, our experiences, and what we become in life, whether it's a career choice, making a choice of a mate, or our avocation, and his just happened to be murder, we're accountable for that.
Bundy discovered in his early 20s that he was illegitimate. He aspired to a higher station than his stepfather could afford, becoming active in local politics. But rejection by a college girl of breeding and refinement may have filled him with smoldering rage. When he began killing less than a year later, all of his victims would bear a resemblance to the girl who'd rejected him. As Agent Hagmeyer spent more time with him, Bundy began to call him his best friend. Bundy shared what it's like to be a serial killer.
He said, when you're alone with a victim who's very much alive and vibrant and pleading for their life, he said, you become God. He said, you have the power over life and death. And he said, when you kill them, you hear the last noises that they'll ever put out of their mouth. You can basically taste the last breath that comes out of their body. And he said, there's a phenomenal feeling of power over that. And he said, that's what you feed off of after a while.
It was like coming out of some kind of horrible trance or dream. I can only liken it to after, I don't want to over-dramatize it, but to have been possessed by something so awful and so alien, and then the next morning wake up from it, remember what happened, and realize that basically, in the eyes of the law, certainly in the eyes of God, you're responsible.
Bundy was convicted of killing 3 women and confessed to killing more than 30 others. Police will never know if that was a boast or a conservative estimate. He received his final punishment on January 24th, 1989, in Florida's electric chair. Hungry for that sense of godlike power, serial killers feel compelled to murder. But they don't always kill their victims. Sometimes they marry them. On June 29, 1991, 2 canoeists were spending a lazy afternoon on Lake Gibson near Niagara Falls, Canada. The waters had receded, revealing several blocks of concrete speckled with black paint. When one of the men stepped on a block, it broke in 2. He was horrified at what he saw. Inside were the severed limbs of a human body. Police found body parts in each of the 8 blocks. It took 2 weeks to obtain the dental records to identify the victim. She was a teenage girl named Leslie Mahaffey, who disappeared 2 weeks earlier from the nearby city of Burlington. Whoever killed her had also sexually abused her. It was a shocking crime in a country unused to violence. Placed in charge of the investigation was Vince Bevan of the Niagara Regional Police.
Once we knew who the victim was, we had, almost a month's lag time in there, so we had to go back and start to retrace to find out, who she was with, what the circumstances were of her disappearance, and start to work back from the city of Burlington to see if we could find any clues that would point us in the right direction about how she met her death and ultimately wound up in the concrete in Lake Gibson.
But there were no witnesses and no clues to the killer's identity. Forensic scientist Mike Kershaw began by looking at the concrete blocks, gingerly sifting through the rubble, hoping to find some piece of helpful evidence.
I examined approximately 700 pounds of concrete, and just the examination using the light sources I spent probably close to 120 hours on. Some of the things we were hoping to find included items that might have come from Leslie Mahaffey, like jewelry. We were also looking for evidence such as saws or saw blades. But what I've been finding is hair, fiber, hair that doesn't look or looks foreign to the concrete itself or foreign to Leslie Mahaffey.
Chemical analysis determined that the concrete was a ready-mix brand so common it was impossible to trace. The paint was a black spray paint. The trace evidence consisted of hair that matched the victim and several strands of different light-colored hair. Kershaw had nothing to compare it with. The forensic evidence was not adding up to much. The search for the Niagara killer took on a new urgency when another young girl named Kristen French was reported missing. She left her school on April 16th and was last seen walking past a church. She never arrived home. 2 weeks after Kristen French disappeared, a scrap collector discovered her body. She'd been sexually abused and killed in much the same fashion as Mahaffey. For Vince Bevan, it was now clear a serial killer was at work, and his increasing boldness was cause for alarm. Kristen French had been abducted at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in a parking lot near a busy street.
For somebody to abduct her from that particular area, it's unusual because of the high level of risk that that offender would have taken. I mean, there are any number of things that could have happened to interfere with what his plan was. And it's not a desperate act by any means, but it is certainly an above normal level of risk for an offender of this type.
The first break in the case came from 75 miles away in the town of Scarborough. For 2 years, police there worked unsuccessfully to catch a serial rapist. Acting on a tip, in 1990 they'd visited Paul Bernardo, an accountant who resembled the man described by some of the victims. He seemed an unlikely suspect.
When you think of somebody who could be responsible for crimes like this, you expect them to be marked in some way. You know, like a hunchback dragging one leg behind him.
As a matter of procedure, police collected blood and saliva samples from Bernardo for DNA testing. He was one of 1,500 potential suspects, and in these early days of DNA testing, the process was time-consuming. It took an overworked Canadian forensics lab 2 years to complete their analysis of Bernardo's DNA. Meantime, Bernardo moved from Scarborough to Niagara in 1991. The serial rapes in Scarborough had suddenly stopped. The killings in Niagara had begun. When the DNA results came back in February 1993, they proved Bernardo was the Scarborough rapist. Scarborough authorities notified Niagara police.
We could have had an opportunity to connect those offenses earlier in the investigation. But as it was, that connection wasn't made until the DNA probe came back with Bernardo.
Bernardo was arrested for the rapes in Scarborough and the murders in Niagara. He denied the murder charges, and police had no sure way to connect him to the killings. If Bevan wanted a conviction, he needed tangible proof. He obtained a warrant to search Bernardo's house. A search team spent 10 weeks looking for hair, blood, fingerprints, any physical evidence showing the presence of the murder victims.
They got in their hands and knees with a stereo microscope and searched tuft by tuft until they started to find hairs, and they actually found small clippings of hair that were unique to Kristen French.
Along with the hair, police found traces of DNA from French and Mahaffey. Autopsies revealed that both victims had been drugged. In a desk drawer, investigators found a tranquilizer that Bernardo's wife, Carla Homolka, had obtained from the veterinarian's office where she worked. On a videotape Bernardo made for insurance purposes, police found an inventory of his basement. More clues came into focus. First was a circular saw, one that matched the type police thought he may have used to dismember his first victim. The next clue on the tape was equally incriminating.
And as he panned across the basement floor, showing some of the tools that he had, he went past an open cupboard. And in the top shelf of this cupboard were 2 cans of spray paint. One had a gray lid, one had a black lid. When we went in and executed the search warrant, and during our search, we were unable to find that black can of spray paint.
Besides the evidence on the tape, investigators noticed gouges on the stairs to his basement. Microscopic examination revealed black paint marks. Forensics experts created concrete blocks similar in size to the ones that contained Mahaffey's body. They spray painted the blocks and pushed them up a similar flight of stairs. The marks they made matched those on Bernardo's stairs. The forensic evidence was piling up, but it was all circumstantial. The case was clinched with the help of a surprising eyewitness. In January 1993, Paul Bernardo's wife, Carla Homolka, left him. She would later tell police that Bernardo had tied her and forced her to act out the last moments of his victims' lives. Fearing she would suffer their fate, she fled. In February, as evidence was mounting against Bernardo, she decided to make a deal and confessed that she herself had played a role in the heinous crimes of Paul Bernardo, crimes that he had videotaped. Carla Homolka had met Paul Bernardo in 1987 when she was still a teenager. Bernardo was a handsome, apparently successful young man 6 years older than she was. But beneath his pleasant exterior, Bernardo was possessed by a desire to subjugate women. Roy Hazelwood, a former FBI agent and an expert on sex-related crimes, has spent 6 years studying the strange bond between serial killers and the women who fall in love with them. Canadian prosecutors called on him to assess Carla's state of mind. Hazelwood believes Bernardo, like many serial killers, saw women as lesser creatures that didn't deserve respectability.
That explains why they go for nice middle-class women rather than prostitutes or alcoholics or drug abusers, because they want to tear down that image of niceness and purity, if you will, that surrounds a nice middle-class person.
As a teenager, he began spying on women in the dark. They became objects that existed only for his pleasure. According to Hazelwood, Bernardo saw his future wife, Carla Homolka, as a woman he knew he could dominate, forcing her to his will.
These men have an innate ability to identify women who are vulnerable, women who are naive, women who have few life experiences or low self-esteem, or they have, as I mentioned earlier, dependent personalities where they crave and need the attention of others and the approval of others.
Carla's parents encouraged her romance with the handsome, upscale Bernardo. By 1990, he already had her under a horrible spell. On Christmas Eve, she helped him drug her own sister, Tammy, so he could have sex with her. But the drug had induced her death instead. They said she drank too much alcohol. No one suspected the truth.
There's no question that Bernardo had manipulated her. She was an attractive, intelligent young woman. Why she ever became involved in the first incident is sort of a mystery to me. But I think it's quite clear that after her sister's death, she was trapped. She had trapped herself, in essence, in a situation that he could take advantage of.
On the night of June 14, 1991, 6 months after Tammy's death, Bernardo went out to stalk young women. According to what he told Carla, he saw Leslie Mahaffey locked out of her house at 2 a.m. He offered his assistance, then lured the girl to his car with the offer of a cigarette. Carla told police Paul had forced her to videotape his sexual assaults on Mahaffey. Paul and Carla were married 2 weeks later. the day police discovered the body sealed in concrete. Over time, Bernardo had tightened his grasp on Carla, drawing her deeper into his crimes.
Because she's in love with him, and because she wants his approval, and because she wants to please him, she agrees to participate, and eventually it becomes more and more bizarre.
Carla helped her husband kidnap Kristen French in April 1992. She'd pretended to need directions, asking the girl to show them where they were on a map. Bernardo sneaked up behind her and shoved her into the car. Once again, according to Homolka, she had participated in and recorded Bernardo's sexual assaults on video. But where were the tapes? Despite 10 weeks of searching every corner and crevice of Bernardo's house, Canadian police were unable to find them. They'd discover later that Bernardo, in jail, had his lawyer remove them. When the tapes were finally turned over to the police, they validated every shocking detail of what Carla had said. Bernardo used the tapes to experience his crimes again and again. The videotapes, along with Carla Homolka's testimony, were more than enough to convict Paul Bernardo. He was sentenced to life in prison, no chance of parole. For her part in the crimes, Carla Homolka was sentenced to 12 years in prison, a sentence based on her testimony prior to finding the videotapes. But the tapes clearly showed Carla participating in the torture and sexual abuse of the victims. Was Carla truly a victim herself, or a savvy accomplice who worked out a sweet deal with the police?
Is she a victim? Not in the sense that she's not responsible for what she did. She certainly is responsible for what she did. And she needs to be punished for her activities, in which she acted in concert in the abduction and or murder of 3 different people. So in that sense, no, she's not a victim. Is she a victim in the sense that she came under his spell? Is she a victim in the sense that he abused her? In that sense, yes, she's a victim in that sense.
From the first of Paul Bernardo's rapes to the day of his capture, almost 6 years had gone by. According to Ann Rule, if he hadn't been caught, he would have continued to kill.
They start maybe 2 or 3 years apart, and then it's 1 a year, and then it's 1 a month, and then it's 1 a week, until toward the end they need more and more of the substance that they crave to make them feel normal. And in the case of serial killers, it's murder. First they do it to get a high, and then after that they seem to need it. And they're almost all caught because they begin to take chances in the end.
Slowly, painfully, experts are learning the warped rules of the sexual serial killer. But do the same rules apply when the killer is a woman? In December 1989, along a Florida highway outside of Daytona Beach, officers found an abandoned car registered to a Tampa man named Richard Mallory. He had been missing for several days. Another week and a half went by before the 51-year-old Mallory turned up, naked, shot several times with a .22 caliber pistol, and abandoned 2 miles from where his vehicle was found. Police sealed off the area to search for clues. Investigator Larry Horzepa of the Volusia County Sheriff's Office led the investigation.
At the time, we weren't exactly sure what we had, so as in all of our homicide investigations that we did an entire sweep of the area and basically collected up everything that we could possibly find that we thought may be connected with the crime.
But investigators found very little evidence pointing to the killer. The investigation was stymied by lack of clues. As Volusia police worked on the case, police in 3 other counties struggled with murders of their own. Immersed in their local crime scenes, they had no knowledge of the other killings, no idea they were connected.
We didn't know about the other killings that had been occurring for almost a year. Basically, we were operating solely on ours.
As the body count climbed, police became aware that a deadly pattern was developing throughout Florida. Finally, the separate police departments pooled their resources.
And we found the similarities in the fact that all the men were older men, being over the ages of 45 years of age, that they were basically all traveling alone, that they were traveling the major highways. We found that the bodies, all of them were discarded close to a major highway, and the fact that the vehicles that they had were placed somewhere else.
The killer had been methodical, consistent. All but one of the victims had been shot in the torso with a .22 caliber pistol, a relatively small firearm. In every case, the driver's seat was pulled up close to the steering wheel. The evidence suggested the killer was a short person, possibly a woman. If this were true, it was one for the books. There'd never been a female serial killer, or at least not one that police knew of. But at this point, it was just a guess. The killer had been thorough, wiping off all fingerprints. Then, on July 4th, 1990, a woman reported to police that she saw a car crash through a fence, then drive off. In the car were two women, a blonde and a shorter brunette. A few miles away, a car matching the description was found abandoned. Witnesses at this scene also described the two women. The car's registration revealed that it belonged to Peter Sims, age 65, an itinerant missionary who'd been missing for almost a month. Police saw a possible connection to the string of homicides. The car was turned over to Merv Stevens of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement.
The vehicle had been basically wiped down on the inside and outside. The crime scene analysts had went to the armrest on the driver's side of the car and had removed the armrest. Upon removing that armrest, they noticed what it looked to appear to be a palm print, a bloody palm print.
The single print was their only clue, and a potentially damning one. But prints in blood are notoriously fragile. Forensics would have only one chance to read the imprint. Only one chance to link killer with crime scene. They could not afford to make a mistake.
I think they made the latent lift as a last resort. Once they had discovered what they thought was a blood print, or looked to be like a blood print, it was reddish brown in color. And in photographing it and using the different lighting techniques, a blood print will tend to dry out. Once a blood print dries out, it becomes real fragile. And simple moving it around, handling that type of item, the print will basically deteriorate and it will fall to pieces.
After the print was photographed, clear tape was carefully placed over it. With even greater care, the tape was slowly lifted. Any little bend in the tape would crack the print and compromise the lift. Once the print adhered to the tape, it was affixed to a white card. The technicians were home free. The lift was a success. They analyzed the palm print and compared it to those of known criminals in the state of Florida. Stevens found a match in a woman named Lori Grody. She'd been convicted on a weapons charge. Grody was also known as Cammie Green and Eileen Warnes. Because several of the missing automobiles had been burglarized, police began checking pawn shops in the hopes of finding the stolen goods. At one, they found a pawn ticket in the name of Cammie Green for a particular brand of camera and a radar detector, items missing from the car of murder victim Richard Mallory. Florida requires pawn shops to take fingerprints. Cammie Green's print from the pawn ticket was compared to the prints in Stevens' files. The prints matched. The bloody palm print and stolen items were now linked to a single person, a woman named Eileen Warnes. Investigators traced Warnes to Daytona Beach, where she was a part of the biker crowd. She hung out at a bar called the Last Resort, where she slept on these benches behind the bar. Undercover police kept her under constant surveillance until they could collect more evidence of her crimes. But when they learned that a statewide biker barbecue was scheduled for the next weekend, they were afraid they'd lose Warnes in the crowd. On January 9, 1991, police made their move and arrested her. A key found in her possession led police to a locker filled with items stolen from the murder victims. The case against Warnes grew stronger. Next, they pressured her friends for more information. To keep them out of it, Warnes confessed.
I shot him, and then I thought to myself, well, I might as well just keep on shooting. Because I gotta kill the guy. He's gonna, go and tell somebody.
When she was convicted in Florida for the murder of 6 men, Warnes had the distinction of being one of the first female serial killers, deadly as the male. But why, beginning in December of 1989, had she become a killer, hitching rides with middle-aged men, suggesting sex for money in a secluded spot, then shooting them to death? Warnes claimed she'd acted in self-defense. It was a claim Larry Horzepa found difficult to believe.
I think as she was applying her trade, as she was going along, for whatever reason, whether she needed more money or whether she decided that this would just be easy pickings, at one point in her life, starting with Mr. Mallory, she decided to bring a firearm into play. And once she went ahead and fired that first shot and killed that first man, felt it was easy. And why not do it again?
Ann Rule has studied women who kill. She disagrees that robbery was the motive. She believes Eileen Warnes felt abused by the men in her life, and the killing was her attempt at retaliation. Her anger was typical of serial killers.
But of all the women that I have ever studied, she is the only one who seems to have a particular victim type, who has a particular MO, who's killing stranger to stranger, and fits into the serial murder pattern.
For Ann Rule, the most chilling aspect of serial killers is their lack of remorse for their crimes.
These people believe that they deserve to have anything they want that makes them feel better. It doesn't matter who gets hurt as long as they're happy, because they are real and the rest of us are paper doll characters. We don't feel the way they do.
With each murder, serial killers lose a little more of their conscience, making the next killing that much easier. As police departments throughout the country begin to share information, they can more quickly see the deadly patterns emerge. Then they can stop serial killers in their tracks.
I think of Ronnie every day.
This was him taken the day his son was born. He was 24 years old. I see things that remind me of him. I see his picture. I find pennies on the road, and I say, oh, Ronnie was here because he used to give me all his pennies. So, I mean, I will dive under a table for a penny if I think it's... And
she would get hit by a car trying to get a damn penny.
And because it's a penny from heaven.
Yeah, it's not a penny from heaven.
And I know that sounds crazy, and people might look at me like it's crazy, but it's my healing. He's with me all the time. I know I lost my son, but never once would anyone come forward and tell the truth. It had to be drug out of them. We had to connect the dots. Are those koi still alive?
Yeah,
or are they...
well, I don't know about the alive part, but this summer I'm going to build a cover for this that is raccoon-proof.
My name is Judy Weaver. I'm from Orlando, Florida. Nowadays, it's amusement parks, but we were here before Disney when it was really nice. And it was very quaint, quiet. Neighbors helped neighbors. We took walks and fed the ducks, and I like cars. So I taught the kids how to change a tire, how to change the oil, and just everything.
My mom, Judy, is tenacious, that's for sure. She is like a dog with a bone at times, and I think I got that straight from her. I'm Deborah Murray. I'm the oldest, and then Ronnie was under me about 5.5 years. And then our sister was about 11 years younger than me.
They were total opposite as far as the energy went. Tammy was very loving and affectionate. Debbie could get a book and sit and read for hours, and Ronnie had to tear up things.
You know, you walk in a room and he'd have a fan pulled completely apart. He was always curious about how things worked. So I didn't want him using my things. So I ran him off a lot.
He was a handful, but he was a joy. He always wanted to be the peacemaker. He never wanted to disappoint. He always wanted me to be proud of him. Back in 2005, Ronnie ended up coming to live with me. He started having trouble with his personal life. He became an addict, and he was ashamed of what he was doing.
He was battling drugs. Ronnie had interactions with people living in that community that were dealing in drugs. A not so great situation.
On June 27th, Ronnie wanted to go to the store to get a pack of cigarettes. His car was in front of my car, so he used his bicycle to go down to the store. It had started raining. I didn't want him to leave. I could feel something wasn't gonna go right. And he said, "Oh, Mom, don't get paranoid." He says, "I'll be back in 10 minutes. He kissed me on my left cheek and told me he loved me, and I'll always remember that that's what I heard out of his mouth. I think most people aren't blessed to have that when they lose their loved ones. 10, 15 minutes later, I was in the shower and I heard my daughter Tammy come home from work. She came and said there's sirens pretty close to the house, and I jumped out of the shower and called Ronnie. He didn't answer the phone. Got in the van and went looking for him.
I was home getting ready for bed, and my mom called and said there had been an accident, and she was on the scene.
I found all the commotion where the police department was and where the fire department was, and you seen the paramedics all out and the people standing around. They were some of the shady people in the neighborhood. I could see them whispering things. It was like a nightmare. I pulled in and an old man says, "It's a young man down the road." And he looked at me and he says, "Oh, it's your son. It's Ronnie." The paramedics were trying to hook him up on the stretcher and everything. And that's when I found him.
When my mom came upon the scene, it was just like something you wish you could unsee. There was blood all over the place, and Ronnie was in an unconscious state. We were being fed a little bit of information here and there from some of the people watching. What they said happened that night was that Ronnie just simply fell off a bike and hit his head on a curb.
This is where Ronnie was supposed to have been hurt. As you can see, still,
Yeah.
there are no curbs.
Yeah, there's still no curbs.
There's still no curbs here.
No curbs up there. They don't exist.
Everything was telling me this isn't right, something's not right. I started observing everything. Well, he fell on a bike that's not there. Where's the bike? Where did he fall? He hit a curb. There's no curb. Where did he hit the curb? When they're getting Ronnie on the stretcher, I'm seeing him now. His pockets are inside out. And they said there was nothing else. He had nothing else on him. I know he had a wallet when he left. I know he had money when he left. I wanted to know how, if he hit a curb, fell off his bike, how did the pockets come inside out of his pants? Nobody had an answer for that. I saw one police officer in a car. He did not come out, take names, didn't bring a clipboard out and ask any questions. He was just sitting there. It was raining. He didn't want to get wet. EMTs told me that his name was Spike. I said, my God, who on earth would name their name Spike? I never got to talk to him because he left. But my concern was to be with my son. We would find out the answers later.
When we arrived to the hospital, I asked that we be able to see Ronnie. We went back into trauma to see him. That was awful, and I wish I could take that away. There was severe brain trauma. There was brain swelling. And the doctor that was going to be doing his brain surgery was explaining the two areas of injury to his head, a temporal lobe injury and an injury to the back of the head. Made you wonder how in the world he hit his head twice, falling off the bicycle one time. So it's still not making any sense.
I called the police. I asked them, why has no one come to check on my son? I have questions and I want answers for, and nobody's willing to come. Well, the officer said he took the report. He's seen it only as an accident. You know, there was no foul play, just a bicycle accident, and that was it. No investigating needed. Even though their story was he had fallen on his bike, the bike had disappeared. I threatened to call and have it reported as stolen. Shortly after that, the bike did appear.
At some point, someone had brought the bike up to her front porch. Somebody rolled up in the middle of the night when we were asleep.
As you can see, there are no scratches on the bike. I've never washed it or anything, just put air in the tire.
There was no damage to the bicycle at all.
Nothing had happened on that bicycle. Everything was like it was when Ronnie rode off on it. That was my first evidence that something else had happened. He was not on this bike when he got hurt. It was not the cause of his death. Oh, well, sorry it happened, but it was just an accident. You know, that's what I was getting. No one was going to help us. I couldn't buy into that. It was up to us to go investigate it. You're not going to take me out of the equation.
It doesn't appear there was any type of investigation done at the scene. There were no police sent or dispatched to the hospital. It was just determined very quickly it was a bicycle fall. And that may have been misconstrued because the sheet I actually got a copy of shows motorcycle accident. When the police arrived, there was no motorcycle and there was no bike. Whatever it was minutes that it was looked into. Ronnie was laid up at the hospital in a coma. I think it was immediate to investigate because it didn't make sense. We tried to research who was who, what their criminal record looked like, what the activity was going on down there at the duplex. I didn't know what I was doing. My mom didn't know what she was doing. We just were going with the flow.
Now, if I had my Firebird, we'd be sounding like that, because it's got a Formula 5.0 in it.
What's wrong with that one?
It's getting a paint job.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, this is a little six-banger, but hey, it does the job. What can I say?
We didn't have to go far to investigate. The duplex was right up from my mom's house. We could just drive by there.
I started going that way then because I wanted to see who was around and who wasn't. This is the main house here where my son was hurt.
We spoke to many people.
We found out the place was a drug house that sold everything.
Then we were realizing some of the people that were witnesses that evening lived there, and the police took the word for what they said happened that night and left it alone. And I filed a complaint with the Orange County Sheriff's Department at that point and received phone calls regarding my complaint letter. It was a detective, and he said Ronnie was at a house that was well known for drugs, so he might not have been an innocent victim in this. And there were far more imperative cases than Ronnie's to check into.
There shouldn't be a line drawn because you're this or you're that. That's not acceptable. There's loved ones that care for those people. Anyone that gets hurt, there's somebody that loves them and they want the right thing done for them, just like they would for anyone else. I knew Ronnie was unconscious and he may not make it. So I need to find out from the streets what's being told. When the police brush you off, they brush you off at the scene and they brush you off on the phone, then yeah, you take it to the streets because the streets are the ones that have the answers.
She would talk to everybody, but it was never different than the falling off the bike story. You have an entire duplex community that potentially saw what happened, but they weren't open to sharing that information. Felt like they were hiding from something that happened. It just didn't make a lot of sense.
They said that Ronnie was horsing around with the bike and he popped a wheelie and hit the curb and the curb threw him down on the ground. He did used to do that when he was a teenager, but not as a grown man. And the only reason he rode the bike, it was to get to the store and back. He didn't go in the rainstorm with a bike to pop a wheelie.
During the time that Ronnie was on life support, we would visit the hospital daily. It was primarily just spent talking to doctors, trying to find out the prognosis. There was discussions on what they could expect would happen with Ronnie.
He wasn't getting better. The fever wasn't going away in the brain and it kept killing cells. I said, well, will he ever recognize me? No. Will he know who he is? No. Everything was no, no, no.
He was never going to move again. He was never going to have a thought. There was no brain left. So at this point, you have to make a decision. Move him to long-term care or take his life support away.
How do you end someone's life that you love so much? But how do you look at somebody that you know was so full of life? Just lay there and and they're at everyone's mercy. How do you do that? It's not easy. I could feel Ronnie begging me to let him go. I could feel him. And I know that I don't want that for myself, and I did not want that for my child. They did all the preparation they needed to do, and when he passed, he died the minute that he was born. It was 8 o'clock, same time, in the same hospital.
When the death certificate was issued, it was listed as an accidental death. I really felt disappointed that this was it, that this was all we were going to get. The ball was dropped the night it happened. The ball was dropped when it went to the detective, and it just kept on bouncing a few more times after that. It needs to be made right.
I needed to know what happened to my child. I needed to know for myself. I needed to get as much information as I could. And so Debbie and I decided we'll just tell the neighbors that Ronnie is alive and he's talking. He's going to a rehab, and then they're going to send him home.
The people living in that duplex community did not know that he never woke up. They thought Ronnie was talking, and Ronnie was telling a story, and it's not the story y'all are telling, it's a different story. She was stirring the pot, pressing them for the truth.
The next day, there was a girl riding down the road, and she was asking me, "How's your son doing?" And I recognized her from that night. I said, "Well, he's got a big headache." I said, "But he's sitting up telling a different story." He said it didn't go down like that. He never fell on his bike. She said, "Oh," and that was it. Next thing I know, I seen somebody walking toward my house. You could tell from his eyes, this guy wasn't right. The man that showed up at my doorstep introduced himself. He said he goes by Jay. I didn't believe what his name was because he seemed like he was fishing for what I knew. He thought Ronnie was up and telling his story.
We didn't really know how he fit into this. We didn't know his angle. It just seemed like he was feeding information to distance himself from his involvement in what happened.
He said that Ronnie had a disagreement with another person over some money he owed him, and so he punched him.
Jay introduced the whole he got hit part, which was different than the falling off the bike story. It went from Papa Willie's to, being hit. So it had already changed.
No, I didn't believe anything he said. I just told him, well, there was an investigation going, and he got real quiet, and then he was wanting us to see that he had his concealed weapon permit. He pulled it out of his wallet, and he addressed me with it.
We didn't know why. We didn't know to take it as a threat. Is it intimidation? We didn't know.
I stood there and I said, well, I'm not going to shut up until I find out what happened to my son. And then he left.
We were just very confused. Now there's an extra layer. This man we don't know came to the house, possibly carrying a weapon. You have to kind of be a little careful because we don't know his role. We don't know him. We didn't know his legal name, but we knew his nickname was Jay. So I did a search on the Orange County Clerk of the Courts. You could look for evictions or criminal record, even so much as a traffic citation. You would find record. You could see where their address was at the time that happened. I found an eviction that was issued to that address where Ronnie was hurt. I had looked up a couple of the names on social media, and I found pictures of Jay. Then I found his girlfriend's details from that. I managed to get his first name. It ended up being that his name was Jason.
Debbie discovered that his girlfriend's daughter went to the school down the street. I asked around. One of the people told me that it was Jason Gailey, and he lived in that neighborhood where Ronnie got hurt.
That's probably the difference in our dynamics. Let me see. I was more the computer and paper trail gal, and my mom, she would talk more and be able to glean more information from talking to people.
I ended up talking to the guy that was Jason's mailman, you know, trying to find out what information I could.
Apparently, Jason's the drug boss in the duplex. He has a license to carry a concealed weapon, and he has a little bit of attitude. He was known for it, plain and simple.
These are Debbie's notes. She's more organized than me. This is his medical examiner. This is the original death certificate. And at this point it said the manner of death was accident. I finally got a hold of someone at the coroner's department, and I asked, could they please go back through the report and go back through his injuries that they found on him and see if there was anything that could say he fell off a bike and hit his head. And they said there was no way humanly possible that the injuries that he had sustained to his head could come from falling off a 24-inch bike when you were 5'10". And it was something that had been inflicted on him. And about 6 months after all this, there is in here another death certificate for a homicide, where it was changed to homicide because of their findings in their autopsy. Let's see what else is in here. Someone drew a picture of Uncle Ronnie, one of Deb's kids, I'm sure, and drew a halo over the top of his head.
We worked really hard to change Ronnie's death certificate. Every day you're faced with things you've never dealt with and didn't think you would ever have to deal with. But this was validation for Ronnie. He was a victim of a homicide, and he had the right to have that known. At this point, they needed to hand this back to the detective in charge, and they needed to do their job. Well, nothing really happened. So I requested a copy of the 911 tape from the night of Ronnie's accident. We didn't know who made the call, but we knew at that time that it was somebody in the duplex community. If whoever it was that called 911 actually saw what happened, we needed to meet that person.
I was coming home, so I figured, let me go down there and look around. There used to be a big dumpster like between all these buildings when they were apartments, and I saw the supervisor that takes care of the land here, and I recognized him. So I started asking him questions. He was telling me that there was eyes and ears and that I needed to stay home where I was safer, and that he didn't know how safe I would be, asking the wrong people the wrong questions. That maintenance man, he knew a lot of the inside scoop on the drug dealer, Jason, AKA Jay, because he had to go into the apartments and repair things. He saw that Jason had cameras right there between the alley and the duplex. Jason used to video everybody. That's how he did his drug dealing. He would know who pulled in that driveway. Didn't stop us still. We still came and got pictures. When it cooled off some, they'd all be sitting on the walls of these two houses.
There would be a lot of activity outside of the duplex, and I think once or twice they even yelled at her because she was driving by snapping pictures out of her car window.
Did I do things that put my life in danger? Yes. But I wanted to find out the truth, and how are you going to find out? If they don't come to you, you got to go to them. Eventually, the maintenance guy connected me with the name of the 911 caller, a guy named Mike. Mike had told him about the phone call. His story was that Jason hit Ronnie during a fight. When Ronnie got hurt, Jason took him inside the apartment and they laid him in the living room on the floor. And they were cleaning him up. They weren't going to even call the police. They weren't going to call anybody. Jason threatened them, all of them. They were forbidden to call 911. But after Mike realized the seriousness of Ronnie's injuries, he felt bad. Mike went to a payphone that was on the back side of the duplexes, away from the cameras, and made the phone call from a payphone.
Mike did ride the bike to the payphone to make the call. That's why there was no bike when the police showed up. So that we could finally understand. Mike said that the emergency response team actually found Ronnie inside the duplex. He had been moved to a sofa. When the paramedics came, he was moved back out. They never asked why. Ronnie was inside the duplex. When the police arrived, if someone had actually investigated that night, that whole bicycle story would have been blown out of the water. But no one did.
I called the state attorney's office and told him we had witness statements that could link Jason to what happened to my son. And they're saying, oh, wrong line, you know, and they try to bluff it out. So I was telling Debbie I can't get anywhere because I'm considered a distraught mom. I'm crazy. I don't know what I'm talking about. Debbie kept all the information together. She figured, well, one day we'll get someone that'll hear us.
I had faxed information to the detective so that he could go further. Kind of just mapped out the evidence we had and documented it into letter form. My mom and I provided him with a picture of Jason. And we told him that this was the person that we thought hit Ronnie. We gave him names and contact information for the witnesses my mom spoke to. We would see what information he would be able to get. Being a law enforcement official, I figured he'd be better at it than us. 6 months later, I asked had they spoke to the individual that we believed hit Ronnie. There had never been any contact with him made at all.
And he never followed up?
No, no one had ever spoke to him. Still. We reached a dead end. We don't know how to, what's the expression, can't fight City Hall? We didn't know what else to do.
It had been 7 years since my son's death. The police weren't doing anything. It was a closed deal, and that was it. I was working in a restaurant, and this police officer came in. And of course, I didn't know who he was.
The night I met Judy Weaver, I decided to grab some food real quick. When I was there eating my dinner, one of the employees, who turned out to be Judy, walked by, and we struck up a conversation.
He says, how are you tonight? And I says, I'm good. I said, how are you? And he says, it's quiet. He says, never anything happening on a Monday night. Or I said, well, a lot of things happen on a Monday night. My son was killed on a Monday night in the pouring down rain. I said, so don't tell me nothing happens in Orlando on a Monday night.
She started speaking about the case to me, and while I was talking to her, she explained to me about the displeasure of a sergeant by the name of Spike Hopkins who did nothing about the case.
I was telling him the investigating officer was somebody with a dog's name, and his name was Spike, and who on earth would name their kid Spike? I was going on cutting down the police officer and how sorry he was and how I wish he could live through the years I had lived and know what I felt. It wasn't nice. But I was honest.
When you told me your story and how bad this Sergeant Spike was, my heart dropped. I remember sitting there thinking, she obviously hasn't seen my name tag. Could I have walked out of there and said, I'm sorry to hear about your circumstances and you'd never known it was me? Yeah.
I didn't know who you were. You could have been anybody.
Right, I could have, but after hearing you're a mother who lost her son, There is no way I could walk out on you after that.
I went off on the guy, and he said to me, well, as you were talking to me, things started ringing a bell. And he pushed his chair back, and he says, let me formally introduce myself. I was the investigating officer, AKA Spike. I was shocked, number one. You know, I talk very badly of you.
Right. Rightly so.
I never had a kind word to say about you at all.
Right.
I hated what you represented, you know.
And I
so-
can't blame you one bit.
Yeah.
I can't blame you one bit. I just felt so bad for the woman, especially because I dropped the ball the night of the event. And then law enforcement and nobody else would do anything to help her. I wanted to get to the bottom of this. I went into the parking lot where my police vehicle was parked, and I was going to do everything I could within my power to make sure that this mom got justice for her son. I got on the computer and wrote an email to our cold case detectives to have them reopen the case so we truly could do the right thing.
After that, out of guilt or compassion, Spike became my friend. He started coming over and checking on me. Did I need anything? And he handpicked these two detectives to do the cold case. They were both remarkable. Couldn't have picked any two better detectives to have done that.
They really beat it into the ground. They went back and talked to everybody. These guys even collected some things that I had that they could not find in the original case file. They worked this hard.
Based on the research and the investigation that Judy and her daughter were able to do, the cold case detectives got the witnesses identified, the suspect identified, and they actually flew out to track down some of the witnesses from that night in other states around the country. Going out and speaking to the eyewitnesses of this, they were able to actually get the motive and how the crime occurred. And their information corroborated what Judy found out. Ronnie was actually struck on the head and did not fall off of a bicycle.
The witnesses were very upfront with the cold case detectives. I think some of them truly wanted my mom to have some form of closure. There were details that came out we didn't know about.
The night that my son was killed, Jason was pistol whipping an older man in that driveway over something, over $10 or something, they said. Ronnie was riding his bike and he intervened. Ronnie said to Jason, why don't you pick on someone closer to your age? And he went after my son with the butt of a gun.
That's what hit the side of Ronnie's head, was that gun, which was impact 1. Impact 2 was when he lost consciousness, was immediately paralyzed on his left side and fell backwards and smacked his head on the concrete.
After they got all the information and everything together and all the witnesses, I figured they had enough cause to arrest Jason. But the detectives wanted to get someone on tape.
I think at that point they were worried Jason would claim it was an accidental hitting of, because of the dispute between he and the other man. So they asked how I would feel about wearing a recording device and go down and speak with the witness to see if he would say anything incriminating. So I agreed to that, and they hid across the street in a car so they could watch, and I approached and chatted with him. It's kind of a silly lead into, but I had to ask him, what happened that night? What really happened that night? And I was a bundle of nerves.
You never know. You're dealing with people that are shady. I was scared for her. I don't want anything to happen to her, too. Debbie, when I was speaking with Spike yesterday, he did not know you wore the wire.
Well, why would he? They would have no reason to keep him totally
Well,
abreast.
because they were keeping him updated, but he thought that was kind of fascinating that you were brave enough to wear a wire.
I wasn't afraid. I could have taken him. What did he say? I'm not sure what he said because I was a wreck, but I asked the detectives to tell me what he said. It had came out that Jason had a gun in his hand. He had taken it back to his apartment. He'd asked his girlfriend to hide the gun, and he threatened all of them if they told him what happened. I think that was why the cold case detectives decided to proceed with charges. You had a weapon in your hand that you took the time to hide. I don't think there was a lot of accident involved in that.
Jason Brian Gailey is charged with second-degree murder because Judy Weaver just wouldn't let it go.
It's not normal for family members to conduct their own investigation, but they were instrumental in giving us enough probable cause to arrest the suspect. If they weren't beating the streets and talking to the people, we would never be here today, and the person who was arrested would have never been arrested.
Based on the new information, Jason Gailey is picked up and charged with murder, and a mother's intuition made it happen.
But the next day, it went on the news. It was on every channel. There was people lined up out there trying with cameras facing my house. I opened my front door and shut it in a hurry. And I called Debbie and I said, my God, that's what we should have done first, was gone to the media. And we wouldn't have had to wait 7 years for them to start an investigation.
After Jason was arrested, he was charged with second-degree murder. And then there was a time frame in which the state attorney has to decide to proceed with charges.
I was able to talk to the detectives several times, and they kept me up to date. I was excited that we could provide Judy and her daughter and Ronnie some justice. Only to have the state attorney drop the charges, this person was going to walk free.
The state attorneys were not confident that the jury would see these witnesses having clear mind and being able to remember details all that well, because so much time had went by.
On the TV, it actually showed Jason, and he just had a smirk on his face. He never said anything. I don't know what their intention was when they let him out, but it didn't matter. He was done anyway. He overdosed and died within about a week after he got out of jail.
Breakfast is ready.
Katie, do you want some bacon?
You guys want to come grab a plate, get some breakfast?
Take that, go sit down.
He might be enjoying my plate if he can lean forward.
Yeah.
Careful, he's quick.
Uh-huh. That's funny.
The job had been done. Late, belated, but it had been done. And we knew what had happened. I knew Ronnie had done a good thing in the end. He had tried to help somebody, and Ronnie's buried, he's gone. He did not die for no reason, but we have to continue to live.
It still bothers me some, you know, and I'm sorry if I get teary-eyed. It's just an emotion for a minute, and you're going to cut it, right? But he was always doing for someone else, which is what happened to him the night he was hurt. And but that was just how he was. He was always that way.
There's no way you can't close it.
There's never going to be a closure.
You can know he's at peace. He's been at peace since, I believe he's been at peace since the day he died. When you let him go, he could go in peace.
You know, I'm just grateful that you were there with me during that time. I think you gave me some strength. I think Ronnie's proud of what we've done on his behalf. Looking at it, I think it made us stronger.
Yeah, I know. I
believe it made us closer. You know, we were fighting for the same thing. We were fighting for justice, for the truth. That's a bond that will never break, and you're going to get justice where justice is deserved. Just have to have faith.
It doesn't appear there was any type of investigation done at the scene. There were no police sent or dispatched to the hospital. It was just determined very quickly it was a bicycle fall. And that may have been misconstrued because the sheet I actually got a copy of shows motorcycle accident. When the police arrived, there was no motorcycle and there was no bike. Whatever it was minutes that it was looked into. Ronnie was laid up at the hospital in a coma. I think it was immediate to...
That's not acceptable. There's loved ones that care for those people. Anyone that gets hurt, there's somebody that loves them and they want the right thing done for them, just like they would for anyone else. I knew Ronnie was unconscious and he may not make it. So I need to find out from the streets what's being told. When the police brush you off, they brush you off at the scene and they brush you off on the phone, then yeah, you take it to the streets because the streets are the ones that have the answers.
She would talk to everybody, but it was never different than the falling off the bike story. You have an entire duplex community that potentially saw what happened, but they weren't open to sharing that information. Felt like they were hiding from something that happened. Just didn't make a lot of sense.
They said that Ronnie was horsing around with the bike and he popped a wheelie and hit the curb and the curb threw him down on the ground. He did used to do that when he was a teenager, but not as a grown man. And the only reason he rode the bike, it was to get to the store and back. He didn't go in a rainstorm with a bike to pop a wheelie.
During the time that Ronnie was on life support, we would visit the hospital daily. It was primarily just spent talking to doctors, trying to find out the prognosis. There was discussions on what they could expect would happen with Ronnie.
He wasn't getting better. The fever wasn't going away in the brain, and it kept killing cells. I said, well, will he ever recognize me? No. Will he know who he is? No. Everything was no, no, no.
He was never going to move again. He was never going to have a thought. There was no brain left. So at this point, you have to make a decision. Move him to long-term care or take his life support away.
How do you end someone's life that you love so much? But how do you look at somebody that you know was so full of life? Just lay there and they're at everyone's mercy. How do you do that? It's not easy. I could feel Ronnie begging me to let him go. I could feel him. And I know that I don't want that for myself, and I did not want that for my child. They did all the preparation they needed to do. And when he passed, he died the minute that he was born. It was 8 o'clock, same time, in the same hospital.
When the death certificate was issued, it was listed as an accidental death. I really felt disappointed that this was it, that this was all we were going to get. The ball was dropped the night it happened. The ball was dropped when it went to the detective, and it just kept on bouncing a few more times after that. It needs to be made right.
I needed to know what happened to my child. I needed to know for myself. I needed to get as much information as I could. And so Debbie and I decided we'll just tell the neighbors that Ronnie is alive and he's talking. He's going to a rehab, and then they're going to send him home.
The people living in that duplex community did not know that he never woke up. They thought Ronnie was talking, and Ronnie was telling a story, and it's not the story y'all are telling, it's a different story. She was stirring the pot, pressing them for the truth.
The next day, there was a girl riding down the road, and she was asking me, "How's your son doing?" And I recognized her from that night. I said, "Well, he's got a big headache." I said, "But he's sitting up telling a different story." He said it didn't go down like that. He never fell on his bike. She said, "Oh," and that was it. Next thing I know, I seen somebody walking toward my house. You could tell from his eyes, this guy wasn't right.